Welcome back to the Redemption Files. I'm your host, Abby Turner. Today's story is about an everyday woman like you, like me, and how she faces infidelity and betrayal, loses her marriage, yet finds herself. Suburban Redemption by Abby Turner. Chapter 1. The Tennis Court Breakdown. It started with a text. Not even a phone call. A text. We need to talk. 4 words that, if we're being honest, never precede a discussion about where to plant the new hydrangeas or whether we should finally replace the cracked tile in the guest bathroom. No, these were doom words. Words that made my stomach drop so hard it took my appetite and self-esteem with it. When Richard got home that evening, after I'd already mentally catalogued every possible disaster ranging from financial ruin to alien abduction, he delivered the blow with all the finesse of a man who once used our wedding china to store leftover chili. I've met someone. She's younger, works in marketing. I remember blinking a lot and nodding like some sort of malfunctioning bobblehead. He kept talking, something about how he didn't mean for it to happen, how he thought I'd be okay, how I'd always been strong. Strong, that word again. People always think it's a compliment, like being called resilient, when what you really want is to sob in peace and eat cake batter out of the bowl without judgment. I waited for the real explanation, the moment he'd laugh and say, "Just kidding," like this was one of his bad dad jokes, on par with the time he told our dinner guests that the pasta was gluten-free because he prayed over it. But the punchline never came. That night, I sat on the edge of our marital bed, well, my bed now, and stared at the wallpaper I picked out during my French country chic phase. It mocked me with its happy little toil farmers harvesting invisible crops of betrayal. I was still in the clothes I wore to Trader Joe's that morning, now crumpled and stained with marinara. I didn't even remember eating pasta. Sleep didn't come. Instead, I stared at the ceiling and mentally reviewed all my failings, starting with the time I forgot our anniversary in year 3 and ending with my tendency to hum while brushing my teeth. I didn't cry. Not yet. I was still too stunned. Betrayal has a processing delay, like a bad internet connection. By dawn, I had a plan or the outline of one. First, survive the morning. Second, don't text him back. Third, smash something, preferably not sentimental or expensive. I went with a mug that said #OneWife, very on the nose. Then I did what any emotionally decimated woman with a competitive streak and a lot of suppressed rage would do. I marched myself to the tennis club, dressed to the nines in white lycra and passive aggression. I swung that racket like it was Richard's smug little face. "Nice backhand," said Margot, my doubles partner and fellow sufferer of suburban ennui. "Something happen?" I smiled, wide, too wide. "Oh, nothing. Just embracing the single life." She paused, lowered her sunglasses. "You're holding the racket like it owes you child support." We laughed. Kind of. That half-sputtering, half-choked sound women make when they're not okay but haven't decided whether to cry or commit a misdemeanor. Margot knew the look. She'd been through it herself. Divorced at 42, now dating a yoga instructor with too many tattoos and not enough furniture. The rest of the match was a blur of serves, volleys, and internal monologues. I thought about the time Richard bought me a blender for Valentine's Day. The time he insisted on controlling the thermostat, like it was a life support system. The way he said, "I'm doing this for us," when what he meant was, "I'm doing this for me, and you'll adapt or get left behind." When we finished, Margot handed me a water bottle and said, "You ever need to rage bake or scream into a throw pillow? I'm 2 doors down." That night, I stood in the kitchen and stared at the stove. I didn't cook, I didn't clean, I didn't cry. I just opened a bottle of rosé and toasted my reflection in the microwave. "To strength," I said, even though I felt about as strong as a wet paper towel. But sometimes pretending is the first step to believing. And that was the beginning, not of healing exactly, but of pretending to heal convincingly enough that it eventually might become true. Chapter 2. Garden of Unearthly Delights. The thing they don't tell you about betrayal is that it turns your hydrangeas into therapy. By midweek, I was elbow-deep in compost and emotional excavation. My garden had never looked better, or angrier. I pruned like a woman possessed, yanking weeds with the vigor of someone who just discovered her entire marriage was one long preamble to a midlife crisis in a pantsuit. There was something deeply satisfying about slicing through old stems, clearing out decay, making room for anything new. I named each weed after a frustration. This one, the time Richard forgot our dog's birthday but remembered his secretary's. That one, the year he bought me a gym membership for Christmas. "You okay, hon?" asked Barb, my neighbour, leaning over the fence like a nosy sitcom character with a heart of gold and a wine fridge in her garage. "I'm fine," I said, jabbing a trowel into the dirt. "Right! That's why you've decapitated your roses." I looked down. The bush did look a little hostile, like it had been through a war. We stood there in silence, the kind that happens when someone cares but doesn't quite know how to say the right thing. Then, she did the only thing that made sense. "You want to get drunk and rewatch Steel Magnolias?" God bless Barb. That night, after half a bottle of Merlot and a good cry during Shelby's insulin coma scene, I admitted it. I always wanted to be a nurse. Barb didn't laugh, didn't raise an eyebrow. She just handed me the rest of the wine. "Then, be one. I'm 38, not dead." I laughed, a real laugh. Maybe the first one in days. "You know, I went to nursing school, graduated, even. But then Richard got that promotion, and we moved, and it just didn't happen." "Then make it happen now." The idea dug into me, stubborn and persistent, like dandelions in spring. It followed me into the shower, into the grocery store, into that weird dream where I was married to Anderson Cooper and we lived on a boat. It wasn't a lightning bolt of inspiration, more like a slow, inevitable dawning, a tug, a whisper, a second chance. The next morning, I found my old transcripts, still in the manila folder labelled "Do Not Lose This," which, frankly, was an optimistic title. I googled local nursing programs and found one that took returning students. Their website had a tab called "It's Never Too Late." I cried when I saw it. Just for a minute. Maybe this wasn't the end of my story, just the messy, mortifying, necessary start of something new. Maybe I could still be more than the woman left behind. I went back to the garden the next day, planted something new, and for the first time in weeks, I felt something bloom. Chapter 3. The Great Purge. After a week of passive-aggressively vacuuming Richard's side of the closet and muttering things like, "Enjoy your wrinkle-free shirts, Cheryl," I decided it was time. Time for what? I wasn't exactly sure, but it involved a trash bag and a playlist titled "Burn It All Down." There's a peculiar kind of grief that settles into your bones when you realize you were the B story in your own life. The supporting character in a man's journey to self-rediscovery via someone who still says YOLO, unironically. So I did what any self-respecting woman with a lot of suppressed feelings and access to Amazon Prime would do. I started purging. The closet went first. Out went the beige cardigans I wore to Richard's office parties, the shapewear that betrayed me with every breath, the pair of heels I wore to our anniversary dinner, the year he gifted me a blender. I kept the blender. It had more staying power than he did. Then I tackled the bathroom. Goodbye his shampoo that smelled like smugness. Goodbye monogram towels. I replaced them with fluffy white ones and a candle that promised serenity with notes of cedar and emotional growth. It mostly smelled like eucalyptus and vengeance. I found one of his old cologne bottles tucked behind the medicine cabinet. I sprayed it, instantly transported to every dull dinner and passive-aggressive argument we'd ever had. I sprayed it again, into the toilet, and flushed. When I reached the attic, things took a turn. There was our wedding album, our travel photos, the letter he wrote me when we were 22 and poor and stupid and in love. I sat down, legs crisscrossed on the dusty floor, and read it, every line. It didn't make me cry. It didn't make me nostalgic. It made me furious. Because that boy, idealistic, earnest, romantic, had vanished somewhere along the line, swallowed by spreadsheets and ambition and the need to feel desirable in the presence of younger women with better eyebrows. And I'd paused my dreams, pressed mute on my ambitions, all for a version of him that didn't even exist anymore. So I did what felt right. I boxed up the memories, not out of anger, but because I didn't need constant reminders of a life I was no longer living. The wedding dress went to a donation centre, The photos went into a plastic bin labelled, "Do not open unless drunk or nostalgic." After 3 hours and 4 emotional snack breaks, I collapsed on the couch. The house felt emptier but lighter. Like it was finally mine. I looked around and made a decision. I was going to reclaim my space. Reclaim myself. So I redecorated. Not in the elegant, Pinterest-perfect way. In the slightly unhinged woman with a paint roller and something to prove way. I painted an accent wall teal because I wanted to. I bought a sofa that didn't match anything but made me smile. I hung a framed print that read, "She believed she could, so she ordered takeout." When Barb came over later, she surveyed the chaos with the approval of a woman who once built a wine rack out of repurposed baby gates. "Looks like a new era," she said, sipping wine. "Or a midlife crisis," I offered. "Tomato, tomato." And we clinked glasses to the mess, to the future, and to the realization that sometimes you have to burn the house down, metaphorically of course, to rebuild something real. Chapter 4. Anatomy of a Dream. The community college smelled like ambition and microwaved burritos. I walked through the glass doors clutching my enrollment papers and a latte I didn't need but used as a shield. It had been 15 years since I'd last been in a classroom, and the rude idea of being a student again made me feel simultaneously excited and vaguely sweaty. Orientation was held in room 204, which looked exactly how you'd expect. Fluorescent lighting, mismatched chairs, and a whiteboard stained with marker ghosts from semesters past. I took a seat near the back, trying not to look like someone who had just deep cleaned her entire life to be here. Our professor, Dr. Patel, walked in with the kind of confidence that only comes from tenure or total disregard for societal norms. She was 50-something, wore leopard print loafers, and had a voice like warm chamomile tea. "Welcome, future nurses," she said, scanning the room. "If you're here because you love helping people, you're in the right place. If you're here because you watched 3 seasons of Grey's Anatomy and thought, that looks fun, prepare to cry." I liked her immediately. The syllabus was intense. Anatomy labs, clinical hours, late-night study sessions, group projects, the kind of schedule that required planning, grit, and an industrial-strength coffee maker. But for the first time in years, I wasn't intimidated. I was hungry. During our break, I met Clara, a 24-year-old with blue hair and enough piercings to set off an airport metal detector. She offered me gum and said, "You don't look like someone who just got out of a relationship. You look like someone who just got out of a cult." I laughed harder than I should have. "Close enough," I said. We bonded over shared trauma, caffeine dependence, and a mutual distaste for group projects. She reminded me of myself at that age, idealistic, tenacious, convinced the world owed her something. And maybe it did. By week 3, I was falling in love, with learning, with purpose, with the feeling of moving forward. I aced my first quiz, got blood on my shoes in lab, cried in the parking lot after a lecture on palliative care. It was hard. It was overwhelming. It was exactly where I needed to be. Richard texted me once, around week 4. Just a simple, "Hope you're okay." I stared at it for a moment, then deleted it. I was more than okay. I was rebuilding, brick by brick, chapter by chapter, in sneakers that hurt my feet and a hoodie that smelled like my favorite candle. I was becoming the woman I'd always meant to be. And in that sterile classroom, under flickering lights and the faint scent of dry erase markers, I felt something I hadn't in a long time. Hope. Chapter 5. The serve heard round the suburbs. It started with a rogue tennis ball and a wicked backhand. Most rebirths don't begin on a court sandwiched between a Pilates studio and a preschool, but mine did. Every Wednesday morning, the neighborhood women gathered for what they called casual tennis, a term that apparently meant highly competitive cardio in expensive athleisure. I had avoided them until now, intimidated by their toned arms and relentless optimism. But I needed something. Something to get me out of my head and into my body. Something that didn't involve flashcards or emotional purging. Tennis seemed harmless enough. I dusted off my racket, still covered in spiderwebs and, possibly, resentment, and signed up. When I arrived, Barb was already there, in a visor that could double as a satellite dish. "I told the girls you'd be joining. Try not to hit anyone in the face," she said cheerfully. That was one time, I mumbled. And, technically, it was a shoulder. The match started. The first few balls were soft, gentle. Then someone yelled, "Let's pick it up." And suddenly, it was the US Open. I wasn't ready. I missed. I flailed. I tripped on my own shoelace. But then something strange happened. I hit the ball, clean, powerful, right down the line. "Oh!" said Barb. "The beast awakens." I smiled. For the first time in a while, I felt powerful, capable, like my body and mind were working in tandem instead of operating in two separate time zones. Halfway through the game, Cheryl, yes, that Cheryl, showed up. She was wearing a cropped tank top and tennis skirt, so short it violated the Geneva Convention. She greeted everyone with hugs and fake laughter, the kind that sounds like a dolphin choking on a cough drop. "Oh my gosh," she said when she saw me. "Didn't expect to see you here." "Didn't expect to see you outside a mirror," I replied sweetly. Barb choked on her electrolyte drink. Cheryl laughed, though it was more of a hiss. "We should totally play doubles sometime." "Hard pass," I said. "But thanks for the offer I didn't ask for." The other women tried to smooth the tension, but the game had shifted. Everyone started hitting a little harder, serving a little faster. I didn't mind. I liked the burn. After the match, as I sipped water and tried to locate my lungs, Barb looped her arm through mine. "You're officially one of us now," she said. "God help me." We laughed, sitting on the bench as the sun rose higher, casting warm light over the cracked court. I felt the ache in my muscles and the peace in my chest. Tennis wasn't just exercise, it was a declaration. I was still here, still strong, still fighting. Later that afternoon, I found an old tennis trophy in the attic, proof that once, long ago, I'd been good at something that didn't involve managing a household or playing emotional air traffic controller. I set it on my nightstand, a reminder. I'd been a person before I was a wife. I could be one again. Chapter 6. Of Soil and Second Chances. Spring arrived late that year, dragging its feet like a reluctant teenager. But when it did finally show up, it was all daffodils and drama. I took it as a sign to get back into gardening. Digging in the dirt was cheaper than therapy and less likely to result in a copay. The flower beds were overgrown and moody, much like me. I put on my sun hat, a pair of gloves, and got to work. There's something profoundly satisfying about ripping weeds out by the root. It's primal, cathartic, almost like closure. I spent hours outside, replanting tulips and resurrecting a neglected rosemary bush. My neighbours waved, their curiosity piqued by the sight of me in overalls wielding a trowel, like a woman with unresolved issues. "Gardening?" Barb asked when she dropped by with lemonade. "Or rage landscaping," I said. "Depends on the day." I told her about the tomato plants I plan to grow, about how I might even start composting. She looked mildly horrified. "What's next? Chickens?" "Don't tempt me." It was in the middle of pruning a stubborn rosebush that I met Ben. He was new to the neighbourhood, recently moved in after a divorce. Tall, handsome in a dishevelled sort of way, and trying to assemble a raised garden bed with the intensity of a man solving a Rubik's Cube in a blackout. "Need help?" I asked. He looked up, startled. "Is it that obvious?" "Only to people who've ever seen a hammer." I walked over, introduced myself, and before I knew it, I was knee-deep in soil helping a near stranger wrestle with lumber. We talked about mulch, irrigation, and eventually life. Turns out, he was also starting over, also licking wounds and trying to grow something new. We laughed about his failed herb garden attempts and bonded over the mutual trauma of assembling furniture. His sense of humour was dry, like mine, not flirty, not pushy, just human. When I got home, I caught myself smiling. It wasn't a romantic smile, it was a recognition smile. Someone else understood the terrain I was walking. That night, I stood on my porch with a cup of tea, watching the stars and listening to the crickets. My garden was still a mess. My heart was still bruised, but things were beginning to bloom. And maybe, just maybe, so was I. I even started keeping a little garden journal, tracking which flowers thrived and which ones refused to cooperate. Barb rolled her eyes when I showed her. But I didn't care. For the first time in ages, I felt like I was growing something just for me. Chapter 7. Anatomy of a Breakdown. The letter came on a Wednesday. Not an email, not a text, a letter. As if he were Abraham Lincoln writing from the front lines of the Civil War. I found it in the mailbox wedged between a Bed Bath and Beyond coupon and an invitation to a neighbourhood wine tasting that I had no intention of attending. My name was written in his neat, accountant-like handwriting. The envelope smelled faintly of his cologne, Cedar Noir, or as I like to call it, Eau de Midlife Crisis. I stared at it for a while, weighing the odds that it contained something poisonous or just emotionally toxic. Finally, I opened it. He apologised. Of course he did. Said he never meant to hurt me. Said Cheryl was unexpected. So is a tornado, that you don't try to build a life with one. Said he hoped I was healing, that I'd find happiness, and that maybe, just maybe, someday we could be friends. I laughed, loud, long, the kind of laugh that borders on maniacal and makes your dog rethink your emotional stability. I poured myself a glass of wine, one of the fancy ones Barb had brought over with a label I couldn't pronounce, and took the letter out to the patio. The garden was humming with bees and the smell of fresh basil. I read it again, this time out loud, to no one. When I got to the part about friendship, I raised my glass. To friends, I said. To the rosebush. May we never become them. The thing about heartbreak is that it doesn't kill you all at once. It's death by 1,000 cuts. Tiny moments where you remember something. A joke, a smell, a habit, and it stings. That night, I let myself sting. I listened to our old playlist, cried into a throat pillow, and ate half a bag of kettle chips like they were prescribed by a therapist. And then, I did something wild. I danced, alone, in my living room, like a cliché come to life. But it felt good, awkward and freeing. My body moved like it remembered being something other than a vessel for disappointment. The next morning, I woke up sore, mascara-streaked, and strangely lighter. I made pancakes, burned the first batch, and laughed at myself instead of crying. I think that's progress. I called Barb. What's the going rate for renting a flamethrower? Why? Just curious. Hypothetically, she showed up an hour later with scones and zero judgment. We read the letter together, dissecting it like high school girls decoding a text from a crush. Her favourite line was, "I hope you're happy." Classic guilt deflection, she said. 10 points for pretentious phrasing, -20 for lack of self-awareness. We laughed, we drank coffee, we mocked him. It was therapy disguised as brunch. Later that afternoon, I took the letter, folded it neatly, and lit it on fire in the grill. I watched it curl and blacken and turn to ash, all while grilling a salmon fillet like some kind of poetic phoenix. It was the most satisfying dinner I'd ever made. Grief is weird. It comes in waves. Some days, I still miss him. Not who he became, but who he was when we were happy. Other days, I remember how small I had made myself to keep him comfortable. And I get angry, not vengeful, just clear. By the end of the week, I had a list, things I would never tolerate again. Topping the list, emotional cowardice, followed closely by anyone who uses the phrase, "It just happened." I pinned the list to the fridge, right next to the calendar and a magnet shaped like a disgruntled cat. It reminded me that healing isn't about becoming someone new. It's about remembering who you were before the world told you to shrink. That week, I stopped apologizing for taking up space. I took the long way home. I wore lipstick to the grocery store. I signed up for a CPR refresher class. I wasn't okay. Not yet, but I was getting there. One burned letter at a time. Chapter 8. The CPR of it all. The classroom smelled faintly of antiseptic and panic. Sign we were either learning something useful or participating in a live reenactment of a Grey's Anatomy episode. I hadn't been in a classroom since my nursing school days, which felt like another lifetime, back when I still believed in fairy tales, and my biggest worry was passing pharmacology. Not rebuilding a life I didn't ask to lose. The CPR refresher course was held at the community centre, a beige building with flickering fluorescent lights and motivational posters from the late 90s. One read, "Teamwork makes the dream work." I made a mental note to cross-stitch it, ironically. There were 6 of us in the class. 2 teenagers, probably lifeguards in training, 1 gym teacher with a whistle around her neck, a nervous-looking dad who kept checking his phone, a man who might have been a retired magician, judging by the vest and top hat, and me, disoriented, disillusioned, but determined. The instructor was a chipper woman named Connie, who wore her CPR dummy like a badge of honor. "This," she said, slapping the torso with the enthusiasm of a game show host, "is Brad. He's not real, but he's very important. Poor Brad. He would suffer many indignities that day." We were instructed to pair up. The teenagers immediately gravitated toward each other with the speed of social magnets. The gym teacher commandeered the magician. That left me and the nervous dad. "Hi," he said, offering a tentative smile. "I'm Jeff. My daughter's got asthma, and I figured it was time to learn how to not completely panic." "Admirable," I said. "I'm learning how to breathe again." So, parallel journeys. We practiced chest compressions, taking turns pushing down on Brad's plastic sternum. "Hard and fast like the Bee Gees," Connie instructed. It was the first time I'd thought of staying alive as anything other than an ironic soundtrack to a failed marriage. Jeff was kind. Not in the smothering way that made me feel like I had to perform gratitude, but in the quiet, decent way that made me feel like maybe kindness still existed. We joked about our terrible form. He complimented my rhythm. I told him I used to play tennis, and that I could probably revive a whale if needed. At break, we sat outside on a bench near the community garden. It was sunny, the kind of spring day that makes you forget your problems long enough to get sunburned. "You're really good at this," he said. "Reviving the dead comes naturally, I guess." I meant being calm. "You seem like you've got it together." I laughed, too loud. I set fire to my ex-husband's letter yesterday while grilling salmon. "So, very stable." He chuckled. "Fire and fish. Sounds like healing." I shrugged. Or insanity. Tough to tell sometimes. When class ended, Connie handed us our certificates with the proud air of someone distributing gold medals. I looked at mine like it was proof I could still be something other than a discarded spouse. Jeff lingered as I packed up. "Hey, if you ever want to practice chest compressions over coffee, I know a place." I blinked. Was that a pickup line or a medical joke? He smiled. "Can't it be both?" I told him I'd think about it. That night, I hung my CPR certificate on the fridge next to the disgruntled cat magnet and my things I would never tolerate again list. It didn't mean I was back to normal, but it meant I could save a life if needed, maybe even my own. Later, I poured myself a glass of wine, grabbed my gardening gloves, and went out to deadhead the roses. The sky was purple, with the kind of dusk that feels like a soft closing curtain. The bees were quiet, the petals delicate beneath my fingers. I wasn't entirely healed, but I was here, breathing, learning, living. CPR wasn't just for emergencies. It was a reminder. Sometimes the heart needs help getting started again. Chapter 9. Tennis balls and truth bombs. The tennis court behind the community centre had seen better days. Much like my love life. The net sagged like a tired metaphor, and weeds pushed through the cracks in the asphalt, reclaiming their territory like nature's version of divorce lawyers. But it was mine, at least for the morning. I hadn't played tennis in months, maybe a year. Not since the before times. Before the affair, before Cheryl with the Pilates toned abs and an Instagram account dedicated to green smoothies and blessed. Tennis had always been my escape, my little rebellion with a racket. And today, I needed it like oxygen. Barb joined me, wearing a visor so aggressive it looked like it could intercept satellite signals. "I brought the good balls," she said, holding up a fresh can with a grin. "Also, metaphorically speaking, I think you're regaining yours. My tennis balls or my ovaries? Why not both?" We warmed up, lobbing lazy volleys across the court, while exchanging life updates. Barb had recently joined a book club that didn't actually read books, just gossiped over wine. She considered it a fair trade. "So," she said between backhands, "CPR dad, what's his situation?" "Divorced. Sweet. Likes breathing. Hot. In a slightly overwhelmed suburban dad kind of way. Still hot. You're allowed to like people again, you know?" I sighed. "It's just weird. The idea of starting over. The idea of anyone seeing me as desirable." She slammed a forehand that whizzed past me. "You're 38, gorgeous, and survived emotional arson. Trust me, desirable is an understatement." We played 3 chaotic games. I lost all of them and gained at least one pulled hamstring. But it felt good. Really good. Like finding an old part of myself I didn't know I'd missed. Afterward, we sat on the bleachers, sipping lukewarm Gatorade and watching a squirrel terrorize the recycling bin. I admitted that I'd started considering applying to nursing jobs. Real ones. Not just thinking about it while crying into garden soil. Finally, Barb said, "The Florence Nightingale of tennis returns. What if they don't want me? What if I'm too old, or too out of practice, or too emotionally unhinged? Then you fake it. Everyone's unhinged. You just carry it better than most." Later that day, I pulled my nursing school diploma out of the storage box in the garage. It was yellowed around the edges and smelled faintly of regret and mothballs. But it was mine. It meant something. I laid it on the kitchen counter, right next to the disgruntled cat magnet and CPR certificate. My shrine to the woman I was rebuilding. I updated my resume. Polished it like a weapon. Typed and deleted a dozen cover letters. Rewrote my qualifications with the fire of a woman who'd been burned and refused to stay ashes. In a moment of whimsy, or maybe defiance, I added a new entry to my fridge list. #6, never again let someone else's fear dim your light. And for the first time in months, I didn't feel like I was surviving. I felt like I was starting to live. The next morning, I sent out 3 applications, drank coffee like a warrior queen, and texted Jeff. "I'm free Thursday. Coffee and compressions still on the table?" His reply came quickly. "Absolutely. I'll bring the caffeine. You bring the heart." My laugh echoed through the kitchen. The dog tilted his head like I was finally losing it. Maybe I was. Or maybe I was just beginning to find it again. Chapter 10. Interview Day and Emotional Armor. I didn't sleep the night before my interview. Instead, I cleaned the baseboards. All of them. Even behind the fridge, where dust bunnies and crumbs go to die. It wasn't nerves exactly. It was anticipation seasoned with dread and a pinch of self-doubt. Like making a souffle with a cracked bowl and hoping it still rises. The job was a part-time RN position at a senior care centre just outside town. I chose it because it felt manageable, humble even. It wasn't IEU or pediatrics, no high-stakes drama. Just people who needed help, and someone who knew where to find the gauze and say the right things. I put on my best interview outfit, navy slacks, a pale blue blouse that didn't scream recently dumped housewife, and sensible flats that looked like they might have come with a warranty. I added mascara and 1 spritz of perfume, nothing too aggressive, just enough to say, I am a capable woman who has cried exactly 0 times in this bathroom today. As I stepped outside, my neighbour Carl was walking his yappy terrier Daisy. He paused, eyeing me with curiosity. "You look sharp," he said. "Court date or job interview?" "Interview. Nursing." He nodded with solemn approval. "Go show on how it's done, Florence." The senior centre was nestled between a pancake house and a tyre shop, which felt about right. Life, carbs, and wear and tear. The receptionist, who looked like she moonlighted as a stand-up comedian, handed me a clipboard and said, "Just fill this out and try not to sell your soul in the process." I liked her immediately. The director of nursing, Cheryl, not the Cheryl thankfully, was a woman in her 50s with a no-nonsense haircut and kind eyes. We sat in her office, surrounded by potted plants and motivational quotes about compassion. One said, "Be the reason someone smiles today." I hoped I wasn't the reason someone cried instead. "So," she began, "tell me about your experience." I told her about nursing school, about staying home to raise the kids, about the life detour that brought me to this moment. I kept it honest, but not pitiful. She didn't need the full soap opera, just the highlight reel. "And what made you decide now was the time to return to nursing?" I paused, took a breath. "Because I forgot who I was for a while, and I think helping other people remember who they are might help me do the same." She smiled like she understood. "You're not the first, and you won't be the last." We talked for 30 minutes. It felt less like an interview and more like an overdue conversation with an old friend. She asked if I could start next week. I blinked. "That's a yes?" "It is, if you want it." I left the building with a small stack of onboarding papers, a tentative schedule, and a stupid, giddy grin I hadn't worn since my pre-betrayal days. To celebrate, I drove straight to the nursery and bought a ridiculous pink hibiscus plant I didn't need. Its blooms were obnoxiously cheerful, like they hadn't known heartbreak at all. I named it Louise. When I got home, Barb was in my kitchen, helping herself to my leftover quiche. I tossed the papers onto the counter. "You're looking at the newest part-time RN at Willow Ridge Senior Care." She screamed, dropped her fork and hugged me like I'd won an Oscar. "You did it. You really did it. Turns out I'm still capable of functioning in society." Who knew? We toasted with ginger ale and made a playlist titled "Nurses Who Rise from the Ashes." It was mostly Beyoncé and classic rock. Later that night, I sat on the porch with a glass of wine and Louise the hibiscus. The stars were faint but present, like hope. My heart still ached in strange places, but it beat stronger now. Not just surviving, healing, moving forward, becoming someone I actually liked again. Chapter 11. Welcome to Willow Ridge. The smell of antiseptic and institutional coffee greeted me at 8:3 a.m. on my first day. Willow Ridge Senior Care was already humming. CNA carts rolled through the hallways like low-stakes NASCAR races, and someone in the rec room was playing an off-key version of Let It Be on the piano. It was oddly comforting. I wore my new scrubs, a soft navy set that cost more than some of my furniture, and my badge hung awkwardly on a retractable clip like a dorky superhero accessory. My hair was tied back in what I hoped looked like professional optimism and not sleep-deprived panic. Cheryl met me by the nurse's station. She handed me a clipboard and a warm smile. "Let's throw you into the deep end. You okay with that?" "As long as there's metaphorical floaties." She introduced me to the staff. Most were kind, a few suspicious, and one nurse named Jolene eyed me like she was already drafting a passive-aggressive post-it for the break room. But I could work with that. Then came the residents. First up, Miss Kowalski. 80 years old, sharp as a tack, and zero filter. She squinted at me and said, "You look like you cried in your car this morning but still showed up. I respect that." "Close," I said. "But the crying happened in the shower. I'm nothing if not efficient." She laughed, wheezed a little, then patted my hand like we'd known each other for decades. Then there was Mr. Halpern, who refused his meds unless they were delivered with a joke. I gave him my best. "Why don't skeletons fight each other? They don't have the guts." He chuckled and took the pills. I made a mental note to Google more skeleton jokes. Lunchtime came fast. I ate a sandwich in the supply closet, which doubled as my safe zone. My phone buzzed. A text from Barb. "Don't kill anyone, and don't let anyone die. That's your whole job, right?" "Close enough," I replied. "Also, why are we out of Chardonnay?" After lunch, I helped with charting, assisted a resident to the bathroom, cleaned up a spill in the hallway, and got yelled at by Jeline for misplacing a chart. "It's okay," Cheryl said quietly afterward. "She's all bark, and also some bite, but she means well." I nodded, trying not to second-guess myself. I hadn't done this in years. My confidence was fragile, like fine china on a trampoline. But by the end of my shift, I'd found my rhythm, a heartbeat, if you will. Before I left, I stopped by to check on Mrs. Kowalski. "You made it through day one," she said, sipping lukewarm tea. "Barely. That's more than most people do. Come back tomorrow and pretend like you belong. Eventually you will." I thanked her, blinking away a tear. Not the ugly cry kind. The good kind. The kind that says, "You're okay. You're on the right path." At home, the dog greeted me like I'd returned from war. I peeled off my scrubs, took a hot shower, and curled up on the couch with leftover pizza and no pants. Barb called. "How's Florence Nightingale 2.0? Still standing. Minimal casualties. Only cried once. So, a win. A very messy, slightly disorganized, surprisingly fulfilling win. That night, I added a new note to the fridge. #7. First days are hard. Be proud anyway. And just like that, I was no longer someone who used to be a nurse. I was a nurse. Again. For real this time. And maybe, just maybe, I was becoming the version of myself I always wanted to be. One shift, one patient, one skeleton joke at a time. Chapter 12. The Garden of Normal. It's strange how quickly something foreign starts to feel normal. 2 weeks into my job at Willow Ridge, I was no longer the wide-eyed new nurse fumbling with chart tabs and mispronouncing medication names. I wasn't exactly Nurse of the Year, but I was learning, growing, and no longer crying in the shower. Progress. My days settled into a rhythm. Early mornings with the dog, half a banana on the drive-in, a full roster of patients, and, if I was lucky, a quiet moment at lunch to breathe. Sometimes that quiet moment happened in the bathroom with a protein bar. Glamorous, I know. Barb was relentless with her post-shift check-ins. Scale of 1 to 10, how many times did you wish for witness protection today? She'd ask. Also, do we need more wine? The answer was always yes. At work, I'd found small joys. Mrs. Kowalski's sarcastic wisdom, the way Mr. Helpin saved his worst puns for me, and the unlikely camaraderie with Jeline, who begrudgingly started leaving me post-it that said things like, "Not terrible job on the Foley cath today. Don't let it go to your head." On my day off, I returned to an old friend I'd neglected. My garden. Once the crown jewel of our backyard, it had wilted during my personal apocalypse. Weeds overtook the daisies, and the hydrangeas looked like they'd read my divorce papers and taken it personally. But I needed to bring something back to life. So I put on gloves, grabbed my rusty trowel, and got to work. My tennis whites were traded for old sweatpants and a tank top that said, "Plant lady is the new cat lady." With each pulled weed and fresh patch of soil, something settled inside me. I remembered how much I loved this, digging my hands into the earth, coaxing beauty from the dirt. It was a little like nursing, now that I thought about it. Mess, patience, and hope. An hour in, my neighbour Carl leaned over the fence with a smirk. "You planting a secret vineyard back there? Just tomatoes and a second chance at emotional stability." "Ambitious," he said, nodding. "Let me know if you need help with irrigation, or sarcasm. I have plenty of both." By afternoon, my back ached and my hands were covered in soil, but it felt good. Honest. Like I was participating in the world again, instead of spectating from behind a pane of glass. Inside, I brewed a pot of tea and sat by the window, watching the garden breathe again. I pulled out my old nursing school notebook. Yes, I'd kept it all these years, and began scribbling down thoughts about the patients I'd met, things I'd learned, and small moments that had mattered. I wasn't just relearning how to be a nurse, I was discovering how to tell the story of it. Later, I found myself in the pantry staring at a box of brownie mix. Baking had been my refuge in the early days of the breakup. Something about precise measurements and chemical reactions soothed me. I texted Barb, "Emergency brownies imminent. Bring wine." She showed up 20 minutes later, still in her realtor blazer, holding a bottle of Cabernet like a trophy. We sat on the porch with brownies and wine and watched the sky turn dusky pink. Louise the hibiscus, now thriving in her pot, rustled in the breeze, like she had something important to say. "You know," Barb said, "you're doing it. The hard thing, the big thing, it doesn't feel big. That's how you know it's real." We clinked glasses and toasted to quiet victories. That night, I added to the fridge, #8, grow things. Even if it's just tomatoes. The garden didn't ask me to be perfect. It just asked me to show up, get dirty, and try. Exactly what I needed to remember. Chapter 13. Tennis and tension. Saturday mornings used to mean brunch with Richard at some overpriced place that served avocado toast like it was laced with gold. Now, it meant tennis. Real, glorious, sweaty tennis. I dusted off my old racket, Wilson, with a grip that had been replaced at least 4 times, and slipped into my favourite white skirt and sun visor. It felt good, familiar, like the version of me I used to be before my life detoured into wife of a cheating CFO territory. Barb met me at the courts, already bouncing on her heels with caffeine-fueled energy and neon pink tennis shoes that screamed, "I am middle-aged and fabulous. You ready to get destroyed?" she said, swinging her racket like she was about to duel someone in Regency-era England, only if it comes with a side of joint pain. We volleyed for 20 minutes, both wildly out of breath and wildly unashamed. The sound of balls hitting the clay, the rhythm of movement, it was therapeutic. I'd forgotten how much power I held in my body, how good it felt to use it. During a break, we collapsed onto the bench with matching groans. "You okay?" Barb asked, handing me a sports drink. "Define okay. My thighs are negotiating a labour strike." She laughed. "Well, you look good. Like you've been sleeping better and smiling more. I think I've reached the acceptance part of the divorce grief cycle." "Yeah? What stage is rage texting your ex when the toaster breaks in?" That was denial. The truth was, I had been feeling lighter lately. Nursing gave me purpose. Gardening grounded me. Tennis reminded me I wasn't a ghost in my own life. After our match, we stopped at the cafe by the courts. The waiter, mid-30s, tattooed forearm, and the kind of smile that made your iced latte melt, took our order. He glanced at me, then back at the menu. "You come here often?" he asked. Barb nudged me so hard I nearly knocked over my water. "First time in years," I said. "Had to dust off the tennis whites." "Well, they look great on you," he said smoothly. "Let me know if you ever want a private lesson. I teach on Sundays." He winked, actually winked, and walked away. "Well, well, well," Barb sang. "You've still got it. It's probably just sweat glow." "Nope, that was flirting. Actual flirting. I think we're witnessing a medical miracle." It was flattering and terrifying and kind of exhilarating. Back at home, I stood in front of the bathroom mirror, inspecting the faint tan line on my shoulder and the way my cheeks still held a post-exercise flush. I didn't look like a woman abandoned. I looked alive. Later that evening, I curled up with a glass of wine and watched an old medical drama, mostly to critique the accuracy. Spoiler alert, you do not shock someone back to life just because they faint. TV lies. As the credits rolled, I stared at my fridge and added a new sticky note. #9, play, sweat, flirt, repeat. Because life, I was learning, didn't stop just because your marriage did. It paused, it rearranged itself, and then, slowly, it asked you to join in again. And when it does, you grab your racket and say yes. Chapter 14. Surprise guests and surprise strength. The thing about starting over is that it doesn't send you a Google Calendar invite. It just happens, usually in the middle of folding laundry or scrubbing mildew off your shower tile. On a cloudy Thursday, I got a text that flipped my stomach like a bad gas station burrito. It was from Richard. Richard, hey, I'm in the neighborhood this weekend. Thought I'd stop by to pick up a few of my books. Saturday, okay. No hello. No how are you. Just books. As if he were retrieving something from storage, not a life he'd abandoned. I stared at the screen, thumb hovering. My instinct was to say no, or something clever like, unfortunately, I burned everything you own in a ceremonial fire. Namaste. But instead, I said, me. Sure. Noon. Then I texted Barb in full caps. Richard, Saturday, here. Send wine. Also a flamethrower. She replied, I'll be there. With snacks. And possibly a taser. Saturday came far too quickly. I cleaned a house like I was auditioning for a reality show called Ex-Wife Wars. I lit a candle, then blew it out because it was cinnamon and I didn't want the place to smell like a breakup pie. When the doorbell rang, I took a deep breath, opened it, and there he was. Same haircut, same leather messenger bag, slightly newer crow's feet. Hi, he said. Come in. The books are in the office, under the shelf labelled Bad Decisions. He chuckled, nervous. I followed him to the office, arms crossed, like I was guarding a vault. He scanned the spines. You've been reading more. Turns out, heartbreak pairs well with historical fiction. He picked up his Hemingway, and something about the way he touched the book made my chest ache. Not with longing, but with nostalgia for someone who no longer existed. Then he turned to me and said, You look good, happier. I am. He nodded slowly. I didn't expect that. I smiled, tight-lipped. Neither did I. We stood there. Two people who used to share a bathroom, and now could barely share a sentence. Then he said something that nearly knocked me over. I'm sorry for how I left, for not being braver. It wasn't enough, but it was something. Thank you, I said, because it felt like the kindest, most civilized way to close a chapter. He took his books, said goodbye, and walked out of my house, and my life, for good. I shut the door and leaned against it, heart thudding. Not with pain, but with peace. Later, Barb and I sat on the porch with wine and leftover charcuterie. She toasted me with a cube of sharp cheddar. 2 exorcisms with closure. I clinked my wine glass against her cue. And to not needing him to feel whole. That night, I stood at the fridge and added, #10. Closure doesn't come with fireworks. Sometimes it's just quiet and overdue. The door had closed, but the window, wide open, and the breeze coming through it smelled a lot like freedom. Chapter 15. The one with the garden party. I hadn't planned on throwing a garden party. I'd simply intended to prune the hydrangeas, dig out the weeds threatening mutiny in the herb patch, and maybe finally figure out if the vine crawling up the trellis was decorative or carnivorous. But somewhere between yanking a dead root and discovering a surprise bloom of cosmos, the idea bloomed too. Why not celebrate something? Anything. Like, say, surviving a marital implosion without turning into a meme. I texted Barb, naturally. I'm thinking of throwing a garden party. For no reason except I feel like I can breathe again. Barb, bless you and your chaotic joy. I'll bring sangria. Me. And maybe your folding chairs. I still only have 2 that aren't metaphorically cursed. Invites went out to the core group. Neighbours, co-workers from the clinic, and that one barista from the cafe who always complimented my earrings. I even invited the yoga instructor, whose only real advice was to breathe deeply through the betrayal, which sounded dumb at the time, but ended up being surprisingly useful. Saturday afternoon arrived, sun-drenched and breezy. I wore a soft cotton dress with pockets because a woman in healing needs both grace and functionality, and set out mismatched plates, wildflower bouquets in mason jars, and enough finger food to suggest I'd watched too many episodes of The Barefoot Contessa during my recovery phase. Guests trickled in with laughter and wine bottles. The air buzzed with conversation. The kind that skips small talk and goes straight to the good stuff. Heartbreak, second chances, Netflix recommendations. Barb was holding court by the strawberry plants, regaling the group with an exaggerated tale of how I almost ran over Richard's vintage record player with my Prius. I didn't correct her. Embellishment was part of the healing process. Then came Sam. Yes, that Sam. The barista turned private tennis instructor who had winked at me and then faded into my mental, nice but unlikely file. Didn't expect an invite, he said, handing me a bottle of wine and a single sunflower. Didn't expect you to show, I replied. But here we are, defying expectations like champs. We chatted by the basil, which I pretended to inspect for aphids, so I didn't have to meet his gaze too directly. He had this calm about him, the kind that wasn't performative or forced. Just there, like good lighting. You look different, he said. It's probably the soil under my nails and the faint smell of cheese cubes. No, he said. You seem lighter. I didn't know what to say, so I made a joke about emotional baggage being easier to carry if you throw half of it into a metaphorical compost bin. Later, as the sun dipped low and people began drifting off with leftover lemon bars and stories to text each other later, Sam helped me gather plates. I meant what I said, he added. You're not just surviving, you're blooming. I blinked, then blurted. You always this poetic, or is it just when you're elbow deep in Tupperware lids? He laughed. Just when I'm impressed. As the last guest left, and I stood alone among fairy lights and half-empty wine glasses, I felt a warm, glowing contentment. Not loud or dazzling, but full. I padded back inside, tired and barefoot, and added to my fridge list. #11. Throw parties, even if just for the sake of feeling the sun on your skin and the laughter in your bones. The garden had grown back. So had I, and I was just getting started. Chapter 16. Patching holes, and not just in drywall. The ceiling in the upstairs guest room decided to cave in on a Tuesday. It was as if the universe took a long look at my progress and said, "How cute. Let's test her." There I was, sipping a lukewarm coffee and Scrubs after my shift, when a sound like thunder or a very enthusiastic raccoon echoed through the house. I ran upstairs to find a chunk of drywall on the carpet and a soggy stain spreading like gossip. My first thought wasn't panic. It was, well, I guess this means the room's finally getting redecorated. Barb, naturally, was thrilled. You've been talking about repainting that room for months. Now you have a reason that isn't just Pinterest envy. She wasn't wrong. The ceiling was a mess. The walls were an uninspired shade of dentist office beige, and the guest bed had a squeak that made it sound haunted. I'd ignored it all, in part because I didn't want to deal with it, but also because it had been Richard's project once. He was supposed to fix it. Then he left, and the project, like the marriage, just sat there, half done, sagging, but now I had to face it. So I rolled up my sleeves, Googled a few how-to videos, and took a trip to the hardware store that felt weirdly like a solo date. I wandered the aisles, checking out spackle and joint tape, and resisting the urge to flirt with the handsome man in the power tool section. Baby steps. The guy at the counter was kind and vaguely amused by my questions. "Doing this yourself?" he asked, attempting to. "How hard can it be?" He grinned. Famous last words. But hey, if you screw it up, you'll just have another hole to fix. That's the beauty of drywall. It forgives. Forgiveness in wall form. I liked that. I spent the weekend patching, sanding, and painting, with the kind of focus usually reserved for surgeons and toddlers building block towers. It wasn't perfect. There were ridges, maybe a few uneven patches, but it was mine. Done with my own 2 hands. Fueled by determination, caffeine, and a playlist of 2000 indie hits, Sam stopped by to return a book he'd borrowed. He really had read it, which scored him points. "What's all this?" he asked, stepping into the freshly painted room that now smelled like lavender and latex. Midlife empowerment meets DIY delusion, I said, brushing a speck of paint off my cheek. He looked around, impressed. You really did this yourself. Drywall and dignity, all patched up. We stood there for a moment in companionable silence. Then he said, "You know, it's funny how fixing a hole in the wall makes you feel like you can fix anything." I nodded. Because maybe you can. That night, I opened a bottle of wine, turned on my favorite guilty pleasure crime show, and stared at the ceiling, not in dread, but in triumph. It was no longer sagging. It was strong, covered, secure, just like me. And on the fridge, I scribbled, #12. Fix the holes, especially the ones you told yourself weren't that bad. Because the truth was, every patch made me feel more whole, and I wasn't done rebuilding yet. Chapter 17. License to Heal. The envelope arrived on a Thursday. Not a magical day, not a symbolic one. Just a regular, run-of-the-mill weekday that smelled like coffee and forgotten laundry. It was buried between a coupon booklet and an offer to refinance the house I was still not ready to claim as solely mine. I opened it cautiously, expecting another bill, a reminder, maybe a birthday card from my aunt who never remembered the right month. But it wasn't any of those. It was my nursing license. After all the night classes, exams, bleary-eyed clinicals, and a long pause that spanned a marriage and a divorce, I had finally taken the exam and passed. I stood there, the paper trembling slightly in my hands, as if it knew how long I'd waited. Barb sounded more excited than I did when I told her. "You did it! You're officially licensed to heal people and everything." "Not to perform surgery," I reminded her. "Still, you're like Florence Nightingale with sass." There was a moment of disbelief that lingered like fog. I had actually followed through. I had taken a dream that was buried under laundry and disappointments, dusted it off, and made it real. For the first time in a very long time, I felt the kind of pride that didn't require a disclaimer. The clinic I'd been volunteering at part-time offered me a full-time role. Benefits, steady hours, the chance to do the thing I always wanted while wearing supportive shoes. It wasn't glamorous, but it felt like stepping into the life I'd been circling for years. "Are you ready for this?" Sam asked me one evening while we played a casual set of tennis. He had a killer backhand, which I refused to acknowledge out loud. "Ready as I'll ever be," I said, serving with slightly more confidence than usual. He smiled. "You look like someone who just remembered who she is." I didn't deflect with a joke this time. I just let the compliment settle in. Starting full-time at the clinic came with its own chaos. Patients who refused flu shots, kids who screamed at thermometers, elderly men who flirted as a reflex. My feet ached at the end of each shift, and my back whispered obscenities. But I went home each night knowing I had made a difference, even in the smallest way. There was one patient, Miss Delaney, whose came in for her blood pressure checks and always brought me baked goods. She swore were sugar-free, but clearly were not. "You've got good hands," she told me once. "Gentle. You were made for this." I almost cried right there in exam room 3. At home, I framed the license and hung it right above my little desk in the kitchen, the one once cluttered with recipe cards and now covered in med charts and sticky notes. On the fridge, I added #13. Dream again. Even if it takes longer than you thought, especially then, because sometimes healing isn't just something you give, it's something you earn. And finally, I was earning mine. Chapter 18. Of Scarves and Second Chances. Tuesdays were becoming my favourite day at the clinic. Not because they were easy. No day with toddlers, grumpy flu season walk-ins, and disorganised charts ever really was. Because on Tuesdays, Sam brought me coffee. "Nurse fuel," he said every time, handing over a cup like he was presenting a Medal of Valor. "That better be extra shot," I warned. "I have a double shift, and a patient who thinks I'm his ex-wife." Sam grinned. "At least you're memorable." There was something comforting about the rhythm of it. Work, coffee, banter, repeat. We weren't dating, not officially. but there was a familiarity growing between us, like the groove in an old favourite chair. Easy, unspoken, warming. The truth was, I hadn't thought about Richard in weeks. Not really. Not in that soul-hollowing, how could he way. He'd become more like a book I once read. Dramatic, unnecessary, with a lousy ending. One rainy Tuesday, Barb roped me into a community centre fundraiser. "You need a social life," she said, waving a sparkly flyer, like it was an invitation to the Met Gala. It was, in reality, a silent auction with lasagna and a mediocre DJ. "Come on," she nudged. "There will be wine, and prizes, and eligible men who own things like rakes." I went. Mostly for the lasagna. The evening started off slow. The crowd was a mix of PTA veterans, bored dads, and a few younger professionals trying to pretend they weren't networking. I wore a navy wrap dress that hadn't seen daylight in 3 years, and a scarf I only pulled out for a second. Moments when I needed to feel slightly mysterious. "You look nice," Sam said when he found me near the raffle table. "Thanks. It's my I'm pretending to have it all together look." He leaned in conspiratorially. "You pull it off." Somewhere between the 4th glass of wine and an enthusiastic debate about local school board elections, we found ourselves slow dancing to a Frank Sinatra cover. It was charmingly off-key. "You know," Sam murmured, "I used to think I had to find someone perfect. Now I think I'd settle for someone real. Perfect's a myth, like calorie-free cheesecake or smooth divorce proceedings." He chuckled. "Real suits you." There was a pause. One of those rare silences that doesn't itch to be filled. Just presence, weightless and safe. I didn't kiss him. Not yet. But I thought about it. When I got home that night, still smelling faintly of red wine and gardenia perfume, I opened my notebook and wrote, #14, let the good things happen. You don't always need a warning label, because maybe I was allowed to enjoy something good without waiting for it to collapse. And I was starting to believe that second chances weren't always desperate pleas. Sometimes they were quiet invitations. Sometimes they were coffee on a Tuesday. Chapter 19. Roots and Revelations. It started with a plant. A peace lily, to be precise. It was delivered to the clinic with a note that read, "For Nurse Julia, thanks for helping me breathe again." No name. Just that. I asked the front desk if anyone knew who sent it. They shrugged. A mystery, wrapped in leaves and soil. I took it home and placed it by the kitchen window. Something about it, green, strong, growing, felt right. Sam stopped by that evening to return a book he'd borrowed and never read. He paused when he saw the lily. Secret admirer? Maybe it's the ghost of my past guilt. Finally sending gifts. Well, it has excellent taste in greenery. We sat in the backyard, nursing glasses of white wine, and watching the sun disappear behind the garden. I'd spent the summer reviving. The plants were thriving. The tomatoes looked like overachievers. Even the lavender, which had initially threatened to give up on me, was blooming with the kind of tenacity I recognized in myself. "You've changed," Sam said quietly. Not in a dramatic way. More like, "You've grown into yourself." I didn't know how to answer that, so I deflected, like I always do. "So, you're saying I'm finally housebroken?" He laughed, but his eyes didn't leave mine. "No, I'm saying you're blooming. And you're the one who planted it." That night, I dreamt of roots. Not the kind that trap you, but the kind that anchor you just enough to stand tall. The next morning, Richard called. It was jarring, hearing his name on my phone screen. I let it ring once, twice. My thumb hovered. I answered, "Hi." His voice was cautious, familiar in a way that felt outdated. "I heard you're working full-time now, as a nurse. I wanted to say congratulations. Thank you." A pause. "I also wanted to say I'm sorry for everything." Another pause. I was a coward. I thought I needed something else. Someone else. But really, I just needed to grow up. I didn't cry. I didn't rage. I just listened. "I appreciate that," I said. "I really do. But I'm not that woman anymore." He was quiet. "I know." After we hung up, I didn't feel relief or triumph. I felt settled, like a chapter had truly closed. No bitterness, no regret, just the quiet dignity of moving forward. On the fridge, I scribbled, #15. Not all roots are meant to stay. Some are just there to teach you how to grow. And I meant it, every word, because some revelations don't come in epiphanies. They come in quiet mornings, green leaves, and the realization that you are not where you started. You're somewhere better. Chapter 20. Letting go. Letting go isn't loud. It doesn't come with fireworks or grand announcements. It comes in pieces, in silent mornings, in steady breaths, in the absence of old thoughts you used to wear like a second skin. It started on a Thursday. I was folding laundry, the most mundane task in the world, and I realized I wasn't angry anymore. Not at Richard, not at the girl he left me for, not even at myself. The hurt was still there, sure, but it had softened. It no longer dictated the rhythm of my day. The peace lily in the window had started to bloom again. It was a subtle thing, but it felt symbolic. Another cycle, another chance. I went to work that day like I always did, scrubbed in and prepped for my shift at the clinic. There were no earth-shattering moments, no big emotional breakthroughs. Just the ordinary beauty of helping people and the quiet pride in knowing I was good at it. Sam came by that evening. He brought over takeout, Thai food this time, and a 6-pack of some locally brewed beer he claimed I had to try. We sat on the back porch, the garden now lush and unruly with late summer growth. "You know," he said, "this place feels different than it did a few months ago. That's because I finally gave up trying to control the lavender. It's staging a coup." He laughed, then looked at me with a softness that made my chest ache just a little. "I meant, you. You feel different." I shrugged. Maybe I stopped trying to be who I thought I had to be. We didn't talk about labels or the future that night. There was comfort in not needing to define things. Maybe love doesn't always show up in declarations. Sometimes it shows up in shared silence, in carrying each other's plates back inside, in remembering the kind of tea I liked, without asking. The next morning, I pulled out the journal I'd started in the early days after Richard left. Most of it was filled with sharp words and sad grocery lists. But on the last page, I wrote, #16. Letting go isn't forgetting, it's remembering without the weight. I closed the journal and placed it in the drawer, not because I was done healing, but because I didn't need to write about the pain anymore. I was living the healing part now. That weekend, I played tennis for the first time in over a year. My serve was rusty, and my backhand was more like a limp handshake, but I didn't care. I laughed. I missed the ball more times than I hit it, but I laughed. The kind of laugh that comes from knowing the worst is behind you. The kind of laugh that plants something new in your chest. Afterward, I walked by myself through the neighborhood. I noticed how the trees had started changing, golden at the edges. I thought about seasons, how they don't ask your permission to change. They just do. And maybe that's the point. We don't have to be ready. We just have to be willing. And so, I was. Willing to let go. To let life grow wild again. To stop pruning the past. To be exactly where I was. Still blooming. Still here. Epilogue. A new beginning. The years didn't rush by. They meandered. Slow and honest. Like healing. Like living. I didn't wake up one morning with everything solved. But I did wake up one morning and realize I hadn't thought about Richard in weeks. When I finally did, it was with a strange, soft sort of gratitude. He hadn't broken me. He'd redirected me toward myself. I became a full-time nurse at the clinic. It wasn't glamorous, and I was exhausted most days, but it felt right. It was mine. My patients learned quickly that beneath my dry humor was someone who genuinely cared. Unless they were late for their appointment, in which case, they'd better come bearing coffee. Sam stayed. In that quiet, dependable way he had. No grand gestures, just consistent presence. A porch light, always on. Some days it was just friendship. Some days it was something more. But I never felt like I owed him anything to earn his steadiness. That was new. Barb had twins and now regularly texts me at 3 a.m. with photos of unidentifiable baby food smeared on walls. She also calls me for advice I'm only marginally qualified to give, but we both pretend I'm an expert. We'd grown into this life like vines on the same trellis, intertwined, chaotic, and weirdly supportive. The garden became a bit of a legend. I started a side hustle growing herbs and selling little bouquets at the local market. People called them healing bundles. I didn't argue. Who was I to say what healed who? There were new dreams. Not big, not flashy, just real. I thought about going back to school for mental health nursing. I thought about writing a book. I thought about never moving again and dying in this house surrounded by lavender. One evening, Sam handed me a tiny envelope with my name on it. Inside was a key to my place, he said. Not asking you to move in, just in case you want to one day. I didn't answer him right away. Just held the key, felt its weight, and smiled. Maybe one day, maybe not. What mattered more was knowing I had options now. That I had rewritten the story I once thought was over, and in that story, I wasn't the woman left behind. I was the woman who stayed standing, who rebuilt, who bloomed. The end. Today's story proves that each of us are stronger than we know, and even if the light seems to fade at times, it never goes away. Thank you for listening to Suburban Redemption. I hope you enjoyed today's story. If you enjoyed this, please consider liking and subscribing to my channel. It is a tremendous amount of work to produce these stories, but I very much enjoy it. I hope you do too. Thank you for listening to the Redemption Files. Until next time, I'm Abby Turner. Take care.